The Lost Book of Mormon, a journey through the mythic lands of Nephi, Zarahemla, and Kansas City, Missouri. Literature was born not the day a boy crying "Wolf, wolf" came running out of the Neanderthal Valley with a big gray wolf at his heels. Literature was born on the day when a boy came crying "Wolf, wolf," and there was no wolf behind him. That the poor little fellow, because he lied too often, was finally eaten up by a real beast is quite incidental. Young Joseph Smith swore that late one night in the fall of 1823, a spirit, barefoot and luminous, visited the cramped bedroom he shared with his brothers and told him the hidden history of America, a history that was engraved on gold plates, that is, gold pages bound by 3 large rings, buried in a hill down the road from the family farm. As a youngish, still struggling writer, I was enthralled by Joseph's stories, and particularly by his impressive run as an underdog, an underground American writer, a cult author, you might say. Joseph's ambition to publish his Bible struck me as a refreshingly honest acknowledgement of what it means to be a writer, a regular Joe with an unreasonable faith in oneself and in literature. I felt that there must be something in his story that would be of value to an American writer today.
This is Infants on Thrones, the philosophies of men mingled with humor. We are the core.
The Book of Mormon is about writing books. Every few pages, the story's various narrators describe to us how the writing of this book is going. Every narrator in the Book of Mormon describes how he wrote, why he wrote, where he wrote. Moroni tells us that he was tired of writing, but wrote anyway.
All right, so let's just start talking about it. And I think this came to my awareness from an email that Jake sent. Jake sent something. It was an article in the New Yorker, and this book was mentioned in that article. And I was reading through it, and I'm like, man, that sounds interesting. Some Jewish guy that doesn't have any background in Mormonism at all, but he just got interested in the Book of Mormon and interested in Joseph Smith as a great American author, and the Book of Mormon as, like a piece of literature, and then traveled to the Book of Mormon locations and wrote about it. I'm like, okay, I've got to check this out. That sounds interesting, and I really enjoyed it. I liked it. And I'm saying that in a defensive way because, John, I know that you didn't.
I really enjoyed it. You sent the audio book, so I didn't read it. I listened to it. But I also really enjoyed it. I got caught up in it, and I think I banged it out in basically 2 or 3 sittings.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people have really liked it. I mean, I heard about it because of Tom Kimball was raving about it.
Yeah.
He just absolutely loved it, and I didn't have that same experience, though, of being able to get into it, like you're saying. And actually, couldn't do it in just a couple settings because I would always it off. It was frustrating me. Yeah. So the audiobook. So
was it frustrating you like beginning to end, or was it mostly frustrating you towards the end?
It was I wasn't able to get into it very much at the beginning. I didn't, and then I kind of got into it at the beginning of when he's at the pageant, and then he really made me mad.
Yeah, I bet I know which part made you mad. But so let's just give a framework for the book. It's basically a memoir. I think of this guy Avi. What's his last name? Steinberg.
Some Jewish name. Is it Steinberg?
Yeah. Tact is your middle name, Randy.
I remember Avi because they said that, but he didn't say his last name a lot.
Yeah.
And since you sent it to me on Dropbox, it's not like the author's name was underneath the title.
Yeah.
But it's always interesting for me to see the Mormon fishbowl through a never Mormon's eyes, right, who's really taken the time to understand it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I found it interesting from that perspective. But yeah, it's like it kind of reminded me of like a poor man's David Foster Wallace. He wrote a book called something supposedly fun I will never do again, and he's this Avi guy is or is it Avi, whatever. He's a journalist, right? Or journalist too.
This is his second book. I mean, he's a writer, and this is the second book that he wrote.
I thought he also wrote for like a newspaper and magazine.
Probably.
But
he
anyway,
referenced doing essays or something a little more short. Yeah.
But he's not nearly as dark and interesting and philosophical. The depth of his philosophy is pedestrian compared to David Foster Wallace, but it's the same style. It's kind of reminiscent of that. John, have you ever read that book or anything from DFW?
No, I haven't read that, but I mean, I'm agreeing with you in that. Here we like Len said, this is a memoir, and so in some ways, what you want then is a person who is, either really, really smart or insightful or brilliant in some way, or maybe they're really quirky and really funny, or something like that. And
yeah,
so
John Ronson's really quirky, or
yeah. So he wasn't carrying the book for me in the first half of the book, and so the character itself, I wasn't sure why. I don't know. So he himself wasn't compelling enough a character. I mean, I like it on paper. This idea that you guys are talking, okay, let's get a Nevermo, a complete outsider. What's their take on all of this weirdness? Looking at the Book of Mormon as literature. I mean, all of that on paper, is great for me. And that's why I was actually, disappointed in the book.
So you didn't see, I found some of his, I thought that he was kind of like an observational, witty comic in a way. Like I just found the way that he described the minutia of everyday life very entertaining, and part of that may have been the way that it was read as an audiobook. So PJ Auckland gave the performance. I thought he did a really good job, but I thought there were times, like there were a couple times that I thought were pretty insightful, and maybe it's more pedestrian compared to other people that you've read, Randy. I don't know to make that comparison, but I thought there were times that touched on really interesting themes and then fleeted away from it because it was more about him being just kind of quirky, observational, describing the things around him that he's seeing.
Yeah, it didn't matter that it was the Book of Mormon. It doesn't matter that it was religion-based. It didn't matter that he was on a trip. It just mattered that he could have been shoe shopping for all he cares, and kind of just told these little anecdotes and described the scenery and
the weird-looking shoe salesman and what they they look like a troll or like the descriptions.
Right.
Yeah, I thought there was. I thought he was witty, but So.
Yeah, and he does paint a nice little picture. I thought he's good with the words, but there were times when he would tell something. I thought, okay, this is really going to lead to a point related back to the Book of Mormon or Joseph Smith or something, and he just is done. He's just telling a story about some funny anecdote about.
Or like he's in Jerusalem. Yeah.
About Mel Gibson or something. What was that?
Yeah, what was that? How did that progress the narrative?
Oh, well, I think it did. But let's take it chronologically so that we've got that as a framework to go by, because I can come back to the reason for bringing in Mel Gibson. But
Apocalyptico, that's what it was.
Yeah, now you're giving it away, man. You couldn't leave that for me to reveal in 30 minutes. You had to do it now.
You can edit it out.
Yeah, right. Okay, so the first scene that he describes is really this meeting that he has with what was it? It was a guy who was going to turn his book into a TV show, right? And they're having lunch together.
Yeah, his first book. Is that David Fry?
David Fry.
Is that his name?
I think that's right.
It's Fry for sure. I can't remember his first name. Very, very controversial writer. He was on Oprah's shit list.
Right. Right, because he would write very exaggerated memoirs that people may call Brian Williams-esque today, or
come on, Brian Williams wasn't that bad.
Okay, I don't know David Fry. So
yeah, well, he has a very tenuous relationship with the truth.
Yeah,
right. He'd write fiction and pass it off as a memoir.
Right. gratuitous fiction.
Yeah, which Avi uses as a way to draw his first comparison to Joseph Smith and say maybe in sitting down across from this David Fry character, I'm getting a glimpse into what Joseph Smith might have been like in creating fiction. And so there was I thought this was interesting when he started talking about Joseph Smith creating a sequel from the Bible and inserting himself in it as a protagonist. I don't know, just all of the different roles that he played. And he's got this line where he's talking about, he describes all the offices that Joseph Smith had, all the different roles he played, the characters that he played during the course of his life.
By the time he was murdered in 1844, he had been the mayor of a rapidly growing city, a rival to Chicago, the head of a bank, a city planner, editor-in-chief, ditch digger, respected amateur wrestler, museum curator, church president, author, translator, seer, general of a large militia, chief of police, chief of secret police, renowned practitioner of white magic, proprietor of a general store, collector of ancient Egyptian mummies and papyri, land surveyor, fugitive in 2 states, farmhand, landlord, would-be arsonist, hotel manager, and planet Earth's one and only prophet of the living God. His bid to unseat James K. Polk for the office of President of the United States ended abruptly when he became a martyr. He died at age 38, survived by at least 48 grieving widows. Joseph didn't just have plural wives, he had plural lives to match, as if he, a literalist to his core, had married each of his personas to a different woman.
Married one wife for every different life that he led, or every different persona, which I thought was cool. So are those things that you like shook your head at, John, and you're like, oh man, this guy, he's way off?
Yeah, because I don't think that adds any insight really to Joseph Smith. I think that he himself has these feelings about what it means to be a writer with the capital W.
Right.
Yeah.
And he's very excited about that. And so he is envisioning that all writers are like him in his feeling about writing. So Joseph Smith was a writer.
Or the way that he idealizes writing.
Yeah, or that how he's exactly. And then I don't know, just with all of those different roles, Joseph Smith does have a million different jobs, but I guess I just didn't think that it's not that he's moving from one to the next. Suddenly he reinvents himself as a store owner. Rather, he's a store owner while he is all those other things, I don't know.
Well, this is where,
and it's not like he has like all those different wives for each one of the times. He's has them all at once. I don't know, So I don't.
Right, and this is where like you can take these little observations that he makes and then moves on from, and if you like really put his observations under a microscope, they don't go very deep. But I was still impressed that he made the observation and then moved on. I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. There's something about that I like.
No, he's clever, and it does make you think, oh, that's really interesting. And then when you think for about 5 seconds, you think, no, that was not interesting. That was just kind of dumb. But he does that a dozen different times, and we'll get to a handful of those where you'll say, oh, wow, that was really clever. No, it wasn't.
No, it's not clever. It's just cute.
Yeah, it is cute. That's a good word to describe. I think there's a lot of cuteness in it. So there were several things in this section. He's talking about how lonely it is to be a fan of the Book of Mormon because there really isn't anybody to talk to about it. And he would have to describe it to people who didn't really know and didn't really care. But
there's nobody in his world that gives a shit. That gives 2 shits about the Book of Mormon.
And when he would describe...
I actually know that feeling, though, actually. So I've spent a whole bunch of time, not in Mormondom, and so where I'm doing Mormon history and living in a relatively have no relationship with Mormon universe, and and the people I have to explain to people, well, I'm the president of a Mormon History Association, Mormons, but anyway, and all this whole long thing, and but there's a bunch of other little ones. But you can actually get to the point pretty quick where people find it interesting when you start talking about Strangites or something like that, and King Strang, and and so it doesn't take that long, but the whole first 5 minutes of the conversation is like, what? People are, hey, what?
Yeah. It's not a good icebreaker at a cocktail party.
No. No, so I mean, that part of it, I definitely could see that, commiserate with that. He's an interest in things that people really aren't interested in. So.
He has an interesting take in that. I thought it was an interesting or unique take in that most people who are interested in Mormonism or the Book of Mormon they're going to care either because they really, really believe or because they really, really don't believe, whereas he seemed to approach it from a lot more of an, I guess objective isn't maybe not the best word, but sort of as a fan of Joseph Smith without being a believer of Joseph Smith. So that's definitely a unique take, at least in my world. I've never seen that approach, and I thought that's what I thought was compelling to hear him talk from that perspective.
Yeah, and I think John nailed it earlier, where it's not so much that he's a fan of Joseph Smith, like the way that most of our listeners would think of Joseph Smith, but he's looking at Joseph Smith as a writer. What did you say, John, with a capital W? You know, this idealized creator of fiction, spinner of myth, that intrigues him, and it's the things that he wants to do himself.
I was also feeling like he was like saying, kind of name dropping. Oh, I'm clearly a writer with a capital W because my first book was so popular they're making it into a TV show, and the guy who I'm talking to this guy who was filled with scandal, but still is guiding pilots through things because he was hanging out with Oprah and stuff like that. So I don't know. So I thought that all of that was I don't know, talking himself up in kind of a crazy.
Yeah. And maybe that was a part of Joseph Smith that he recognized and was drawn to as well.
Okay,
that self-aggrandizement.
Joseph Smith does do that part, yes.
Right. So there were. It seemed that he was very well read in describing Mormon history, but there were certain things. There were three things in particular that he brought up that I wanted to fact check with you, John. So he mentions how when Joseph would tell stories, he never told the same version twice, and there was always some kind of evolution to what he was doing. And he used as one of the examples that the Moroni that appeared in vision in early versions of that story, it was an angel called Nephi. And I've heard that in other sources, but I've never really fact checked how solid or credible is that detail there, that it used to be Nephi and then it became Moroni.
Yeah, so I think that actually the earliest stories it's not even clear that it's an angel. So, and actually Mormons don't even, the Mormon conception of angel is a ghost anyway.
Yeah. So
in other words, in all of Judeo-Christendom, Moroni, there's a name for what Moroni is, which is ghost. Angel is a completely separate thing, which is an order of being that has nothing to do with humans. So anyway, so in the initial story as it's told, there is possibly a spirit or a ghost, and then it's only over time that a name gets attached to it. The most frequent early name that's attached to that is Nephi, and then at some point or other, it's later, and especially I think after Joseph's death, even they just go through and they remark it all and change it all to Moroni to make it consistent.
So what is the source for the Nephi story? Where is that coming from? I'm putting you on the spot, but do you remember?
I'd have to go back to, but it would be in Vogel's early Mormon documents, and so he's collected the 5 volumes of every single early account of everything that you have on from the Palmyra period and Harmony period, and it's all listed there.
So it'd be things that were printed in newspapers saying that.
Yeah, or the early reminiscences, especially. So what you'd have the reminiscences wouldn't have been changed, but you'd go back to an early witness who has fallen away or something like that, and how do they remember how the story was told? And so that's where this is where the ultimately. The salamander letter comes from, right? Because
I want to go to that one too with the toad.
Right. Yeah. Because the reason why the salamander letter is a forgery, of course, but the reason why that rang true and all the Mormon history experts authenticated that was because it was definitely in keeping with an actual affidavit that Vlasis Hurlbut had collected from, a person who was antagonistic to Joseph Smith, but who remembered, one of his magician friends, who had remembered, this story of the guardian spirit that had been in the form of a toad. So, which is just it's a magic creature,
right?
And so it's not a. Anyway.
That doesn't, I don't know if this is a remnant of my believing self, but that just doesn't ring credible to me. I think we talked about Hurlbut as a source of a lot of information when we did our Who Wrote the Book of Mormon discussion. He just seems kind of specious to me anyway. But are there other sources besides Hurlbut for this toad thing?
So I think that's a single account, and so that's why it can be. I think that can just, you don't have to believe that at all. So antagonistic source, it's not just Hurlbut, it's the guy who was giving the affidavit who's antagonistic to the Smiths. So you don't have to. I mean, it could be that that's his understanding of it. He heard it that way because he's interested in magic, So
it's not a stretch because Joseph Smith was totally into the occult. From what I read in Insider's View and in also in Rough Stone Rolling. That Quinn. Quinn. I didn't read any of Quinn's stuff, but wouldn't they do occult type rituals to try to, before they would start on their treasure digging?
Absolutely.
So, it's not like outlandish.
It's not out of there. You can easily fit it in. So, if you read early Mormonism and the Magic Worldview, Quinn initially is writing that to explain things like this new, scandalous salamander letter, the Hoffman letter, but it's actually the reason why forgeries were so well received was because they were in keeping with what we understood the evidence to be anyway. So.
Yeah, but I get what you're saying, Glenn. As a believer, I would have said, "Oh, bullshit."
Yeah, and
that's total bullshit.
And I'm still able to compartmentalize the occult rituals that he did around treasure seeking and the stories of an angel appearing in his bedroom, or the spirit guide for the gold
plates. It's a spirit, though. That's a cult. In other words, you're having an occult thing where you're talking to a spirit of a deceased person. It's all in the same camp of stuff. The same thing. He's using the seer stone, the scrying, in order to find buried treasure. The golden plates are buried treasure if there ever was any. And he's using the same stone. So it is all. Being a seer, and he even takes the seer title, and that's even in the Book of Mormon. And the seer is better than a prophet, and it's better in the Book of Mormon. So.
Yeah. All right. The other thing I wanted to ask you about was this Captain Kidd map that they talk about of the Comora Islands in the Indian Sea, where the capital city is Moroni. Is that real?
Yeah,
that is.
So that's a neat new thing. It's a new connection. I'm trying to think if it's Mike Reed who kind of tracked some of that down. But anyway, there's there's always been that. So there's always been Moroni in the Comoros or Comora Island. Mm-hmm. That's always been a connection. But it's always like, well, how on earth do you connect that to anything?
Right.
So what? That's on the map. Joseph Smith isn't going down to the public library and looking at the map because they don't have maps very much. Or he could have, but how do you connect it to him? You just have to imagine that he did it somehow. But the neat new connection that somebody, anyway, maybe it's Mike Reed or somebody has made, where there are these what's his name? Which is the pirate's name?
Captain Kidd. Yeah.
So the Captain Kidd legend takes place down there in the Comoros Islands, and then it also there's actually, if I'm given to understand it, I don't know this. I'm getting this secondhand again from Mike Reed. It is that somebody who went there, and they actually having they still have in Palmyra like a pirate festival because they were excited about the idea that Captain Kidd had come there or something. So anyway, that's all new stuff. I haven't read that in any books, but there must be some kind of an article that Avi is drawing from that I haven't read the article, but I think there is an article in the Journal of Mormon History.
And wasn't it that Joseph had a copy of that book, or he would invoke Captain Kidd's story, or one of them was an account while they were treasure seeking, and he said that he saw Captain Kidd sailing upon the river or wherever it was. I think it was something like that. anyway.
Yeah, so for that part, I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of these early accounts. He may well have been interested in these treasures because they're treasure seekers, right?
Yeah.
So that's actually the first time I've seen an actual plausible way of how do you connect this Moroni and the Comoros Islands to Joseph Smith. Otherwise, it's just a parallel, and there's parallels like anything or coincidences and parallels. But this is by putting that in there, it's kind of interesting. I'm not saying that we can say I haven't read anything that where anybody's saying anything more conclusively than that, but that's not out there.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, those were some fact check things that I wanted to run by you. Did you pick out other things like that as you were listening to it, especially the early descriptions of Joseph Smith and the gold plates? And there were a lot of details that he put in as he recounted the story of Joseph getting the plates and hiding the plates and suggesting that was the first big schism in the marriage with Emma Smith when she wasn't allowed to see the plates.
Well, that's speculative.
Yeah,
and that's much later in the book.
Yeah, is it? Okay.
Yeah.
But
like one of his, I'm sure it's just a writing convention, is that he speaks as though everything that happened in Mormon history and in the Book of Mormon itself, as if it happened.
Right.
I guess saying allegedly over and over and over would get tiresome.
Yeah.
Or was that more intentional?
It was intentional. He says at some point, I've got it marked down to include this clip, actually, that he wanted to experience the book in the language that it was written in.
Hundreds of years later, the allure of the Book of Mormon is still in its insistence on being a completely true story that describes real places and real people. A true history of this continent translated from an actual gold book buried in our backyard. For some reason, I have come to feel the need to submit to its charms, to take it at its word, to believe the story. Not necessarily because I do believe in the story, but because belief in the story may be the closest thing to reading it in its original language. Does believing in the story make one a believer? No more than learning Russian makes one a Russian. And isn't that the best way to read Gogol? If Joseph was able to translate his gold book, even though he couldn't read its language, maybe I too could find a way to translate it. I could return to a source even more primary than the plates themselves, the settings described in the plates, the material stuff of the story. If the events that happened in these places really did happen, there would be physical evidence left to explore. And so I set out on a journey through the exotic locales of this lost, great American novel. I would rewrite the Book of Mormon by rereading it, and reread it by retracing its physical trail, following the book where it would lead me.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And basically that means to accept it as if he was a believer. So he tried to put himself in the position that he's a believer, and so he takes that position throughout. But he's so snide and cynical about certain things. He's not. But
yeah, he goes in and out of that
right.
all throughout the whole book.
Yeah.
So does the next place he go to Jerusalem?
Yeah. So then he goes to Jerusalem, and I don't know. I mean, I thought it was pretty uneventful. There were some interesting things in there. I thought that the story about the BYU, what was it? They were trying to build.
Yeah, that was really funny because so what he does, he paints a picture of this land of Jerusalem, which the major religions, or three major religions, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, had struggled and clawed and fought for hundreds, sometimes thousands of years to get a piece of this land. And then do you think the Jews are going to let these, black-suited, air-conditioned, Lincoln car riding Americans just waltz in and claim their piece, these new kids on the block? And I hadn't known that the Mormons had struck a deal where they would stop translating the Book of Mormon in Hebrew. That project was stopped at the time of the book was written as part of a deal for them to get what kind of center did they have there? Like
the BYU Jerusalem Center.
The BYU Jerusalem Center. Did the church actually think that they could come in, waltz in, and buy some land and build a temple?
I don't know the end of the I don't know if that history all happened. That's all modern stuff, and I didn't know if that's. I mean, I don't know about it. I do know that center's there, and it's on the Mount of Olives. They've got a very impressive, place, and it's a pretty impressive facility.
Right. They had to make concessions, and he referred to it as hazing, which I thought was cute.
To me, the biggest takeaway from his time in Jerusalem was when he talked about the Jerusalem syndrome.
Yeah.
Where tourists come, they get wrapped up in the religiosity of this place.
Well, the romanticism, too.
Yeah. But and so this is and then they put on robes and they go and they preach and it's like they become a Bible character or something. It's this psychological disorder, and I wasn't sure when I was listening to this if this was real or if he was taking some creative license in this, and so I looked it up and it's real. Had you guys heard of this before?
No.
I think I'd heard of it before.
Yeah.
But anyway, I didn't heard of it in the kind of detail. I mean, it was interesting. I mean, and of course, like his point that people don't end up deciding that they're a minor biblical character.
Yeah, right.
Not a lot about Habakkuk's running around,
Yeah.
So,
and then he goes on and he does his kind of like, I'm going to try and be deep and make connections here. And Jesus was the first sufferer of Jerusalem syndrome, that he was just a carpenter that went into Jerusalem and boom, all of a sudden he's the main character in the Bible kind of thing, which, I didn't quite.
I guess that's where, again, he's being cute, right?
Right. Yeah.
So, I mean, I like Randy's description of that as just, he's continuously cute, but those connections, I don't find cute. Maybe they're cute, but anyway, and not helpful. I don't know. Anyway.
No, it's more about him than it is about any kind of historical Jesus.
Yeah. Well, at least in the old world, a few women could get the Jerusalem syndrome, but if you go to Cumorah, you're not going to get the Cumorah syndrome. Who are you going to be, Abish? Or whiny Sarah, or was it Sarah? Soraya? Yeah, whiny Soraya, or the harlot Isabel.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think the reason that he brings this up, and the reason I think it's the main takeaway from this section is because he uses it later when he's talking about the group that's in, Guatemala and Mexico and going through the Book of Mormon lands. But it's almost an extension of his main theme or the thesis of his book that Mormonism, starting with the founder, Joseph Smith, is making yourself a character in this continuing story. Because one of the things that I made a note of, we skipped over earlier, he talked about the Brigham Young recollection that when Joseph had to return the plates to Cumorah, the hill opened up and he was inside a big cave and saw all of these plates.
One
all
of them was
records.
like 6 feet tall.
Yeah. And so there's all this potential story that has yet to be told, and that really connected with me, because when I was a kid and I was growing up in this, I heard that story and I was totally enraptured by it, to the point, I think I've told you guys before, when I was a missionary in Japan in my first area, I wanted to be like Indiana Jones and find the gold plates of the Japanese lost tribes, and kept wondering, I wonder if God has called me here specifically to find this, and I'm going to be the next Joseph Smith. And then, of course, several years later, when I hear that in the Book of Mormon musical, and Elder Price is like, I'm the next Joseph Smith, all these, everybody came together until finally they made me. I'm like, yeah, it is. But like Mormonism totally, for me at least, my experience with it was put me in this cosmic narrative where I was a really important player in an extension of biblical stories, going back to Adam and Eve and all this stuff, and it's all tied together. So I think the Jerusalem syndrome that he's talking about, that actually happens when people visit Jerusalem in this place, because Mormonism has this Book of Mormon, and it's all about the stories and the narrative. That narrative becomes the place where, and maybe I'm just getting too cute right now, that Mormons suffer from Jerusalem syndrome just by imagining themselves as a part of this narrative, or at least I did. So that was one of the appeals of the book to me.
So how did this one guy not stand out to you, Glenn? Because you actually played audio clips in your mini-sode when you were talking about the mounds in Ohio or something like that.
Oh, Wayne May?
The Book of Mormon.
The Nephite explorer?
Yes. And he ran into that guy, I guess. And this line was so funny because they have excavated one of the ruins of an outer wall of Old Jerusalem. And he says, because this Mormon guy wants to come and see where, walk the steps of Nephi. And he says he likes to think that he, is exploring the whole city, but most of the time he's hanging out by this wall because that's all there is.
Right, yeah.
That's the only connection that the Book of Mormon has. And he keeps assuming that the lost 116 pages, the Book of Lehi, had a more in-depth account of when Lehi's family was living in Jerusalem, but I don't know if that's true. I'm not sure that if Nephi, the Book of Nephi, is just like the South Park episode all about Mormons said. It'll be the same basic story, but told in a little different way. But the point I'm trying to make is that the connection, the depth of the connection of the Book of Mormon to Jerusalem is so incredibly shallow that going to Jerusalem, it would be a totally disappointing experience, I would think. If your motivation to go there is to walk the steps of Nephi, not Jesus.
Right.
Yeah.
That was part of the feeling I had with this portion of it is that the Book of Mormon, if you're considering what Joseph Smith is trying to do, in other words, if you're trying to think about Joseph Smith in the Book of Mormon has nothing to do with modern day Jerusalem. It has nothing to do with much of Jerusalem at all. There's really but Joseph Smith knew nothing more about Jerusalem. His connection with Jerusalem is what you can get from listening to preachers talk out of the Bible.
But this is I really liked the cute way that Avi tied this idea of a sequel together. That the Bible ends with Jerusalem and everything's supposed to end with Jerusalem, but the Book of Mormon starts with Jerusalem and then branches out from there. So the Jerusalem is that linchpin that connects the version 1 to the sequel to version 2, and I liked that he goes to Jerusalem and he's talking about honestly, I'm just trying to stall on writing the book that I'm finishing right now.
This little street emptied into the Valley of the Cross, a forested park and popular barbecue spot where roughly 1,977 years earlier a tree had been cut down and fashioned into the cross upon which Jesus would spend his agonizing final hours. It seemed like just the place to finish up a book. Except that I wasn't trying to finish the book. Or rather, I was actively trying to not finish it. This wasn't hard to do. I even found ways to make progress on the manuscript that somehow still wouldn't put me in any danger of finishing it, like a literary version of Zeno's paradox, the old thought experiment that imagines a guy who runs toward the finish line of a race, but will never reach it, because he must first arrive at the halfway point, then at the quarter point, then at the eighth, and continues to arrive at these half milestones infinitely. And if he's truly splitting the difference infinitely, he can't ever be said to have arrived at the end point. Spending an afternoon reading about Zeno as book research, for example, brought me another half measure not closer to finishing my book. So did taking off entire afternoons to search for the Book of Mormon in a city where there was no Book of Mormon.
The search for the Book of Mormon that doesn't exist in this city anywhere. Yep. And I don't know.
Well,
I like that.
He finds one that's written in Samoan.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay.
What did you guys think about his just his blanket statement that people who see angels are unhappy people and people who write Bibles are it was people who believe in angels are unhappy, people who actually see angels are miserable. Do you remember that line early on?
Yeah, that's one of the things he says. He says that at the beginning, and then he comes back to that at the end, doesn't he?
Yeah. Well, then he as an extension from that, he says, but then a person who would choose to write scripture or write a Bible is faithless. He has absolutely no faith. He has to create He has so little faith that the only thing he can do is create something from him to believe in.
I guess I thought that again, this idea that it's people who are miserable who write. In Avi's conception of why anybody would ever write anything is because he's a miserable person and he's wants miserable. To write. And so, I mean, it's actually he's got like everybody, people are very most familiar with their own experience, and then they project, they extrapolate based on their own experience. So I don't think that all people who write books are miserable. So I think sometimes you maybe are. Like books. I like books. I like to make books. I don't feel like I'm miserable when I want to write a book. So, but I don't think of myself as being a writer with a capital W either. That's not my. So I don't know. Maybe when you're wandering around and you have Jerusalem syndrome of the, and you maybe do have that feeling. I don't know.
The pained artist. Yeah.
So from Jerusalem, he builds a boat with his own bare hands.
Yes.
No, he doesn't do that.
He laughed at that. That was. I did like his insight that the Jewish people or whatever, as recorded in the Bible, are the least nautical people in the universe, and like just pretty much everything that God is just telling them. Just stay away from water people.
It's like you said. I think he cited 3 stories in the Bible. One of them was Jonah, who tells the crew to throw him off the boat, and he gets swallowed up.
Noah, where he literally builds the boat in the middle of the desert, and then God makes an ocean all around him. He can't steer the damn boat, and it literally lands on a mountain, and the water goes away. And that is that's their sum total of experience with sailing. And suddenly Nephi gets to the edge of wherever and builds a boat.
So I got a little jealous of Avi when he started describing this Book of Mormon tour that he went on. And I thought of you guys, and I thought, wouldn't it be fun to do like an Infants on Thrones tour?
Oh, that'd be
of
great.
Book of Mormon lands.
That'd be great.
But I loved that he was keeping a daily journal. He was, he was interacting with the people. He was describing, it was mainly these 2 families, one really large family from Utah that were just totally obnoxious, looking for a McDonald's anywhere they could find it, and then another from Australia that was a little more quirky and like a lot of Australians that I know. Very, very interesting description of these people.
Like one of the guys is a surfer, and his whole dream is to get his arm bit off by a shark, so he can write a book and be famous, like this other surfer that got famous with his arm bit off by a shark.
Yeah,
and he even says, "I got bumped into a shark once, but I think that's as close as I'll ever get."
So, and it's the way that he interweaves these observations that he has of these people with the Mormon side of what they're doing and what they're exploring there. I don't know. I just found it so fascinating.
He nailed Mormonism in a couple descriptions without knowing it. Just kind of describing their reaction. They're very, they're just very Utah-y reactions to everything.
Yeah.
Well, right. The first time he encounters the group, he is just completely mobbed and glad-handed because they know he's Jewish, and Mormons they think they got a backstage pass to Judaism, so they actually call non-Mormons Gentiles.
Right?
How insulting is that? And but what he didn't realize what was happening is that it wasn't just the Jewphilia that Mormons have. It was we really wanted to give him a wonderful experience and show him how nice we are, so that he'll want to join the church.
Yeah, right.
And he had no idea that was, or at least he didn't say he had any idea that was part of it.
Yeah.
So I believe that this is a tour that my brother and sister-in-law went on twice.
Wow.
A few years ago, as I was just going through my faith crisis, I remember they were having this conversation about seeing literally the Book of Mormon sites, and I was just really a bit of an asshole and just kind of saying, well, that's great. When are we going to go on the Never Never Land tour? This will be awesome.
Complete with Never Never Land map, man. I just loved it. It was so kitsch, so Mormon, this tour. Because if we do a trip as a group, I'm not interested in just going to ruins as ourselves and doing regular tours.
Oh, no. Yeah.
We got to do the Mormon tour.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
I know, but would you be mean to the people on it though, or you would just be nice to them like he did, right?
I'd be playing a role.
Okay.
That's Randy's way of saying I'd be nice.
It's so hard. I mean, you go to these places. I mean, I go to Mormon history sites all the time, and I actually do tours in, like where I'll be a tour guide in Nauvoo, at the Joseph Smith sites and or in Kirtland, taking people through Kirtland Temple. And, I mean, when people are on that kind of a pilgrimage, I mean, you just can't help but, be nice to them and try to help them with wherever they are at. With that.
Yeah, but you're on the bad side of Nauvoo.
Right.
because I've taken those tours. I remember going through the tours in Nauvoo, and I went through the LDS side, and I went through the Community of Christ side, and I was so much the people that I were with didn't trust anything that Community of Christ were saying.
Right.
They thought,
I remember that.
They're not telling us actual history.
Yes.
You got to take all this with a grain of salt. And I'm like, are you kidding me? This is so much more informative than the missionary couples that have no idea what they're talking about on the LDS side. I was completely on the different side of the argument there with that group. But
when you go through the Kirtland Temple, it's just really sad because knowing that Jesus appeared there, but you can't feel the Spirit anymore because you guys just chased it away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not only that, when I was in the Kirtland Temple tour, Community of Christ woman was the guide, and she told the story of Joseph Smith leaving like a coward in the middle of the night to escape his all the people. Yeah, to escape all the people that were his creditors. And you could tell, because I was Mormon back then, but I was a secret non-believer, so it was right at that transition. And the Mormons were all looking at each other, shaking their heads.
yeah.
So that was when I first realized, the Community of Christ has really changed.
Well, whereas that appearance of Jesus in the Kirtland Temple story is that's completely late addition thing that's not attested from the time period at all, and it's so critically massively important to Mormons. Are so obsessed with it because it's retroactively the sealing power is supposedly given during this thing, but this is like a late exactly. Elias and Elijah
when you say
both
late,
show up.
What
it's like after Joseph Smith died, somebody remembers it in just one source, so it's really, I mean, it's hard for us to even talk about it in the Kirtland Temple tour because it's not history, and so therefore, but everybody, that's all the Mormons who go there want. They want, where did Jesus appear? They want to they want to know that, I mean, it's a late story. It's really it's not attested very well at all, and in fact, it's talking about it's specifically talking about stuff that is clearly anachronistic. So we really nowhere.
Yeah, you guys have a shorter version of Doctrine and Covenants because all of your sources from Doctrine and Covenants would be pre 1844, I guess, right. And then once they got to Utah, they had all of these memories, and they added a bunch of sections. So that's why it's just not in the narrative for the Community of Christ at all.
And I remember even struggling as a missionary with that Jesus appearing in Kirtland Temple because I'm like, well, wait a second. I thought that the next time that he appeared was supposed to usher in the second coming, and then somebody pointed out, oh yeah, but so his feet weren't touching the ground when he was in the Kirtland Temple. It was on this gold thing. So that's how you can spin that story that it wasn't actually the second coming. There are other people that were like, no, it did. It ushered in the pre-second coming. Then the second one when he sets his foot down on the Mount of Olives and it splits in two and ushers in this great earthquake and Gog and Magog and Armageddon and all that stuff. Okay.
Well, I mean, the Elijah theology is kind of like a pre. In other words, the reason why Joseph Smith is exploring having Elijah come to him and that kind of thing is because that's associated with a pre-second coming kind of thing. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
So there's two highlights on this Cumorah tour. The first one is the Tree of Life. The second one's the Hill Cumorah. The Hill Cumorah. It's a mountain Cumorah. John, have you ever seen? I've never seen this alleged. Which the head of the archaeology department at BYU is the one who said this is the tree of life. This is likely near where the Lehi's and his family landed. I mean, it's just like, oh my God, he can't be taken seriously by the field of archaeology.
No, they're not.
God.
You mean no? This tree. You're saying the tree of life thing is it's the temple of the cross, right? So it's the world tree symbol, the cross.
I'm going to look it up.
In Palenque, isn't that what it is? Palenque.
Well, he described the people in it looking like elves, not like the freedmen, muscle-bound Nephites.
Yeah.
But and then he was really confused at how everyone was drawing all the connections, because he's read the Book of Mormon a couple of times, and he just couldn't believe that they were making these connections.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a tree.
Yeah,
no,
well,
I think I've seen pictures of it before. I'm looking at it here, but there's like a lot of recreations of it, of like what they think was there, right? Because most of it is worn down and you can't really tell.
But it's from the time when they first saw it, So in other words, the thing is discovered a long time ago, if it's the one I'm thinking of, and so it immediately made people who, before we were able to decipher Maya, people had all of these, Quetzalcoatl was right. Jesus kind of connection things. All of the, made people go nuts. And there was one of these. If it's the one I'm thinking of, there's a reproduction of it that's 6 feet tall that used to be in the auditorium in Community Christ headquarters.
Really?
But obviously, subsequently, it's been hidden. I mean, in other words, they took it away. And
you guys are embarrassed about it now.
This is Izapa Stella 5.
Okay,
Tree of Life, Lehi, right?
Okay, it may not be that one, but anyway, another one of these that was like that. Our LDS folks were down there way before the LDS people started in on it. So like the limited geography stuff, that was like at the turn of the 20th century, our LDS people were already thinking about all that. And so if you read Michael Coe's book, Breaking the Mayan Code, so he's the guy who's the one of the main Mayan
Mesoamerican,
an actual scholar of the thing. When he's telling the story of it, he recounts a story of how, like in the 1950s, in Guatemala somewhere, he ran into an apostle of the RLDS Church who was assuring him that this glyph, proved that Jesus had come back and that this was the Zarahemla and all this kind of thing. Michael Coe's next line in his book is, whatever ravings of the lunatic fringe aside, or whatever.
Well, he was a lot kinder in his interview with Delenn, but he described these Mormon archaeologists as amateurs that would come down with metal detectors. They're looking for the swords that don't exist, or possibly the mountains of plates that Mormon used to bridge the gold plates, and just he would just face palm and shake his head.
Yeah. Well, so this part of the book, this is one of the things about this hybrid of this book. So are you trying to get interested in the Book of Mormon and Joseph Smith, and are you thinking about that, or are we looking at modern day Mormons? Or Avi's own journey of reading the Book of Mormon, and so what modern day Mormon has nothing to do with Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon. And anyway, one of the most uncomfortable moments in this book is, Avi has decided here that he's a believer. He's a believer in the Book of Mormon, and he's constantly saying, this is Zarahemla, this is the land of Nephi, maybe there's all these plates around here or something like that, because he's made that decision. And then when he goes into the village with the Mayan people, and he's thinking, are we imposing? He suddenly kind of has a little bit of a realization for a second, anyway, that he's imposing this on this poor people that are there.
He doesn't talk about cultural imperialism that I even remember at all.
I mean, he only has almost a fleeting, moment when he starts to realize how awful it is that what they're doing and what he's frankly doing and participating in, it's racist for European Americans to insist that the Book of Mormon is a literal history, and especially to try to impose Guatemala, and it also has nothing to do with the text. So,
I didn't get the sense that he was really a believer at that point, but he was walking around in those shoes like he had at different times in the book.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Anyway,
I was probably more forgiving in that
for me
one.
when he was doing that. So.
but so what did you started off saying this hybrid? Is he talking about Joseph Smith, early Mormons? Is he talking about modern Mormons? Or is it just a memoir about himself? To me, it hasn't really deviated at all. This is all still just about himself and his own exploration as a writer, because he keeps having these asides about this article that he's supposed to be writing about. Right. What was it? Do you remember? It was the language or music or something like that. I don't remember exactly what it was. But he makes some connection to it. He's like, oh, I figured out that this is this because I'm here and I figured it out. Kind of thing. Yep. And his big revelation at the end, which I still think is kind of cool, because he's talking about that stories are all around us and that people find meaning in their life by being a part of a narrative. And he compares that to the image of plates being buried all over the place, but that there actually is a Hill Cumorah in all of us.
And he tells the story. There's this one crazy guy in the group, and he was definitely getting the Cumorah syndrome,
the Jerusalem syndrome for Book of Mormon. That's right.
Yeah, right. And so all of a sudden, he's always taking off. This time he takes off when they're taking pictures of the Hill Cumorah, and he's trying to jump up.
Cumorah or whatever.
Yeah, the Guatemala. Right. Well, they weren't in Mexico. Okay.
Mexican Hill Cumorah. I'm sorry.
Yeah. And he was at that moment he realized that guy just had to. He'd been enchanted by all these stories he'd heard, but they were just allegory. And he had this overwhelming drive to be on the Hill Cumorah so that he could be in the story.
And he was the guy that had to touch all the artifacts and smell them and just overwhelm the sensory imprint of what these things are to bolster his testimony later on in life, I think was the explanation that he gave for it. Right. But but so Avi draws as a metaphor, and he's not always clear. You kind of have to infer, right now he's using this as metaphor when he says, I believe that the Hill Cumorah is real and that there are records inside of it that have yet to be translated or stories that are yet to be told. He's just talking about that potential of narrative, and it goes back to his own idealization of writing and narratives. But
every story is a translation, and if every story is a translation, then every potential book comes from Cumorah,
But at the same time, it's still culturally violent.
I absolutely love all of those. Well, I was going to say, I absolutely love all of those musings and all of that part. In other words, I think that those are great, concepts and everything like that. It's then when he muses about what he thinks Joseph Smith thought or this and that, that's all crap. In other words,
when he says Joseph Smith is both Nephi and Laban, or no?
No. Joseph Smith's dad is both
and Laban and Lehi. That's right.
Yeah, that's a fantastic insight that he is quoting directly from Bill Morane's,
right.
Where he's doing it. Who's
sort of
a dear friend of mine in the Community of Christ, and he's also, he's a fantastic psychologist and scholar, and he's written Joseph Smith and the Disassociated Mind, and that is brilliant. And that was almost the most brilliant insight he had on Joseph Smith the whole time, where he's saying that Joseph Smith in the Sword of Laban, he's obsessed with because of this, this childhood trauma when they had this leg operation, and then later his dad is this drunk on the one hand, but his dad is also a visionary, right. And so in psychologically in writing his first novel, there's a psychological palimpsest or whatever where he is able to play these things out and show us into his psyche, and so he chops the head off his drunkard dad to free the visionary. And I mean, that's a brilliant thesis that Bill Morane has.
So that came from Bill Morane. Okay.
Yeah. And he cites him. Yeah, he gives him credit for it.
He gave him a call out. I mean, absolutely.
I missed that. I just thought that was Avi's insight.
I was going to say, where he goes off the rails is when he says, but he also killed a man to get a book. Maybe.
Well, let's get to that.
Well,
we're not there yet. We're not there
well,
yet.
You guys already jumped it already, so
I'm sorry. That was my fault.
Yeah. So he finishes
So
the
I
Book
love
of Mormon
the part
lands.
about that there's a Cumorah everywhere, and that there's that everything's a translation. That we, that there's the other plates, and that we're all that kind of thing. I mean, that's fine.
So and if people are wondering why we're talking about a Cumorah in Mexico, it's this idea that when Mormon was commissioned by Amaron to take the golden plates, it was at the Hill Cumorah, but this wasn't the Cumorah where the plates were buried, that he had made some pilgrimage from Mexico to New York to deposit those plates, but there was an original Hill Cumorah in Mexico. So that's the connection there. So then Avi goes from Mexico to New York, and he takes on an assumed name, which is what, Yusuf Green? Something like that?
Yeah, Joseph Green?
Yeah, which is his homage to Joseph Smith.
Yeah, but that was just so weird. Why did you...
He didn't even know.
Explain why he did it, but...
He says, I don't even know why I did it.
Right, that's why I found it a little annoying. Well, then why'd you do it?
Yeah.
Well, but he's telling the story what he did, and he lamented that he did it, because now he had to remember his name is Yosef.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I think he especially lamented it in retrospect since he got caught.
Yeah, he got caught and he got kicked out. But he was part of the Hill Cumorah pageant for, what was it, about 4 or 5 days. He was cast as one of the wicked priests of the King Noah.
Yep.
And so he tells the Abinadi story, which I found very entertaining, him talking about the Abinadi story, and kind of like poking fun at the illogical parts of that story. As he's telling it. I don't know. I like that part. And then just, again, he's describing the people that he's around and their lives and their quirky eccentricisms.
The time had come for me to take the stage, in rehearsal, to inhabit the role of Wicked Priest number 2. Or, to be more precise, to inhabit the role of Joseph Green playing Wicked Priest number 2. The scene seemed straightforward enough. The wicked priests would enter at one of the high stages, stage 5, then march in a slow, eerie processional to the sounds of imperial trumpets, drum rolls, and other ominous royal flourishes. We were instructed to act seriously arrogant. While walking single file, projecting a nauseating degree of confidence, we were to descend a tall flight of stairs, at the top of which was evil King Noah's giant gaudy throne, tricked out with a massive jaguar head that looked like a college team mascot afflicted by rabies. Arrogantly, we wickeds were to take our positions at the foot of the stairs, where we were to chat with each other in an arrogant manner about matters that even an audience member sitting all the way down in the meadow, well over 6 stories and hundreds of feet away, could plainly see concerned the worst kind of arrogance. A big drum roll signaled us to halt abruptly, kneel, and thrust our arms skyward, toward the throne, in a double-barreled Hail Caesar salute. This was evil King Noah's cue to enter stage left, next to the rabid mascot, and fly into his maniacal spiel. That was the opening. The challenge of the grand entrance was twofold. It went without saying that you had to act really arrogant, but more pressingly, you had to refrain from giggling. This latter effort was made nearly impossible by the sight that confronted us the moment we entered. On a stage below, a group of what appeared to be not quite 9th grade girls hoisted gold bowls above their heads while doing a suggestive stutter-step circle dance. These were the notorious court dancers, a much sought-after role among the younger set of cast members. As we wicked priests entered, these nubile court dancers were cued to stop suddenly and salute us with their bowls, which was supposed to add a layer of sleazy innuendo to our arrogance. But the effect of suddenly seeing a group of gawky, brace-faced suburban schoolgirls dressed as courtesans made it nearly impossible to maintain our arrogance and not laugh. The music stopped. From down below, the director yelled, "Guys, seriously, let's get through this."
He painted a beautiful picture of exactly what I would expect whoever was going to play Nephi, the star of the pageant, BYU jock with his hat down, and he's just praying. He's on his knees like a statue, mumbling to himself, and then hops up
Chest
take
bumps
off
the guy who's playing Mormon or whatever, or who's playing Joseph Smith or whatever, so the other jock.
The spiritual jock.
Yeah.
You know what, Randy? We skipped over the Mel Gibson hotel room in the Book of Mormon Tourland. Do you want to go back to that one real quick?
Yeah, because he then tells the story of, well, it's not a story, but he had apparently done some research of some Mormon movie nuts blog, and they were lamenting about, why can't Mormons make anything good? Everything sucks ass.
Why do Mormon movies suck?
Yeah, Richard Dutcher.
Well,
and then they start just completely gushing about Apocalyptico. Because to them, that was the greatest Book of Mormon movie ever made.
Right. That was the closest thing to the Book of Mormon stories realistically told.
Did you guys ever see that?
No.
Yeah. It has nothing to do with Book of Mormon.
Well, just that they're Lamanites. Like
that's the only connection.
Well, sure, but
they're kind of warring, fighting, right?
I turned on Crocodile Dundee 2 the other day just on a whim to watch with my kids, and I hadn't seen it since whatever it came out in the mid '80s when I was a teenager, and I remember watching that thinking, oh, these Colombian drug lords, they're totally Lamanites. You can just see in their faces how wicked they are, that they are descended from these awful, wicked Lamanites. So, yeah, the Apocalyptico is that on steroids, man.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically just a story of this peasant family that's in the wilderness trying to escape the king's people who go out and kidnap people to have their head cut off for a ritual. And then it's totally inaccurate because the Mayans collapsed before the Europeans arrived, and it ends with them seeing the Europeans coming to land. I'm like, oh my God. Just Wikipedia would have taken care of that little problem.
There, in terms of like crazy, not Mormon, but as kind of like a Mormon Book of Mormon movie, so like this one that isn't actually Mormon, but anyway, people thought is the best one. When I was a little kid, I just had seen, started in not the beginning of one, but you watch movies on Saturday afternoon, just old movies, and there was this movie that had Yul Brynner in it, and already, that's already since I mean, it's pretty much you're halfway to being scripture at that point, because of the Ten Commandments, right? But like, there's this two tribes essentially. There's these there's absolutely white Mayan guys who are, like really civilized, and they've got all this stuff, and they have to flee from these evil, bad Mayans. Actually, it turns out they were the Toltecs or something. And they go across from the Yucatan to maybe Texas or Louisiana or something like that, where they meet like regular American Indians. And so when I was like, I was a 10-year-old kid or something like that, it just started this is the Book of Mormon, and I have no idea what this movie even is, as a little kid, and then Yul Brynner is like the chief of the Lamanites, and then there's this guy who, and they start building their own pyramids in Louisiana or whatever, these Mayan refugees, the Nephites are kind of moving north to escape, from the, as they're doing this, and they ultimately it works out that they join forces when the Toltecs come after them or something like that. And it was crazy because I'd never. It was like white Indians and Indian Indians, and I'd never seen, and I'd never been able to figure it out again. At some point or other, I remembered that I couldn't think. And I'm like, oh, the internet exists now, right? And so I was able to like type it in, and I found it in a second on IMDb, and found out that this is an old movie called Kings of the Sun, and I actually bought it on Amazon so I could see it,
And it is just like the Book of Mormon because it's racist. White equals good, dark equals bad.
No, because Yul Brynner, ultimately they learned that the bad Indians were actually, could be at least civil to you if you, were nice to them.
Oh, okay. So that's right out of the anti-Nephi Lehi's and
right, exactly.
The Book of Mormon. But you wanted to tell the Mel Gibson story, Glenn, about the hotel room?
No, I knew you wanted to, and we had skipped. I told you earlier, wait till we get to it, and then we skipped over it.
didn't really want to tell the Mel Gibson story because it wasn't really that interesting.
Oh, okay. All right. So he's in the Hill Cumorah pageant. He's cast as a wicked priest. He's having a hard time keeping a straight face because they've got these teenage girls dancing with golden bowls on their heads, and he's just looking at this like this is wanton behavior. That was funny to me. It is
funny how he describes just all the different over-the-top, unrealistic.
The director saying, "Be wicked."
And I thought the funny part was that they cast all the jocks and all this. In all the speaking parts, and they cast all of the whatever people who are short or overweight or whatever in all the bad parts, all the wicked parts. But then the funny part then is that even though it's a full on Mormon production, or maybe even maybe because it is, every single character in his story who is like a director or doing casting or choreography or anything else, like it's just flamboyantly gay.
Guys, seriously, let's get through this.
You're right. You're right.
And it's just like, it's like, and of course it is a pageant, people. It's a pageant.
Let's say we were listening to an audiobook version of this, and this could have been P.J. Auckland's choice. In the voice that he's using to do that. I don't know that Avi wrote that in there, but
that's so funny because he did. He played them all gay. Well, I like how he describes all the wicked priests are short and chubby, except for Alma, who is another jock. He says so the reveal at the end isn't a reveal because everybody knows who Alma's going to be. He's a 6'4" guy.
And then one of the fat guys turned to him during casting. He's like, "Are they looking for actors or a football team?"
Yeah. Yeah, so at one point he gets bored and he goes to visit the printing press, and he starts talking about Spalding theory.
Yeah,
and this is the part where you got really pissed, right, John?
Sure. Yeah.
Sure.
The only thing I didn't like was the only thing I'm going to say on this, because I'm not taking on John Hamer head on
again
on this, but I don't like the notion, and I've had this argument put forth to me by believers, is that the Spalding theory and the actual or the Mormon theory, that the gold plates exist and Moroni exists, are just they're just mirror images of each other. They're both a matter of faith, and they're both just as likely.
Which he did say that.
And that I was like, fuck you. I mean, any naturalistic explanation, no matter how unlikely, is more likely than what the Mormon Church is putting out there. Because you have Occam's razor, principle is huge. I mean, you're taking a gigantic assumption.
So basically, you're saying you don't want to get into this, but you just want to say what you think about it.
I just want to say that it's not. They're not both a matter of faith. One is a matter of plausibility. The other one is a matter of pure faith.
Right. Yeah, and he drew that equivalency. So that's one of the things he did. But then, so of course he recounts the Criddle study.
Yeah.
At length, which is fine, and he actually plays out. He says, "Well, of course, then they did." Fail to even test Joseph Smith, which maybe that's kind of a thing, And so so that was just fine. But then he goes on. So that's fine. That's out there. That's a study. It was published in a journal. So that's fine. Yeah. But then he goes on to say, okay, according to biographer Fawn Brody, a proponent of the Spalding-Rigdon theory, Rigdon would have known Joseph by reputation as the child seer of Palmyra, New York. They have decided that this strapping youth was exactly the prophet he needed for his book in progress. So Rigdon tracked down the boy, and the rest is history. Fawn Brody is not a proponent of the Spalding-Rigdon theory. Fawn Brody is the first person who actually looked at this whole thing academically and therefore decided that there was no case to be made at all. And so his quoting here, he's quoting her as a source of this preposterous idea that Rigdon would have known of him as the boy prophet before he'd been a prophet.
He's probably quoting her quoting the theory. And so it's totally out of context. Does that make sense?
He's
that makes
probably,
sense.
I don't know what he's quoting, but he has it exactly opposite. But then when he goes on from there, from that error, he goes on from there to say, maybe Rigdon drugged Joseph, created a sound and light show for him, and told him he was God. Maybe Rigdon was also Moroni. Maybe all the strings were being pulled by the Nephi. Maybe, and then he goes on even worse, though, and he's like, okay, well, so Spalding died all this long time ago, but maybe it's the fact that Laban gets murdered is in fact because Joseph Smith was confessing to his own murder of Solomon Spalding.
In order to get a book, right?
In order to get the damn book. And so the problem, the problem with that is that there's already, okay, that's totally preposterous, it's ludicrous, it's stupid, it's crap. But the problem with saying that kind of thing is that people already who don't know any better, are already latch on to all kinds of crap in this community. And so that's a poisonous, venomous nonsense musing to be put into because it's like saying that there's no way that the Pentagon was hit by a plane because the plane didn't leave wing marks on it just left it must have been hit by a missile because missiles are shaped like a cylinder and the plane didn't leave wing marks like when Bugs Bunny goes through a wall. And that's really what he's saying.
But he puts these little cues in there, like no matter how many times I've asked, they still haven't exhumed Spalding's body so we can test this. Maybe that's part of the conspiracy. So he puts these little things in here that is like a wink to the reader.
He says it very clearly. He says to get off onto his little poisonous speculative path, he says, if the text is your only guide,
you can make
nearly any theory can be supported.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but how many times, Matt didn't even listen that he quoted
right.
Somebody directly. In other words, that he quoted Bill Murray directly.
Right.
So anyway, so nobody's paying attention to him putting that cue in. I'm just saying that musing is not helpful.
Well, I get what you're saying, that it's dangerous to put in there, but I think what I got out of it is that he's having fun becoming a myth maker. Like, he's been talking about creating narratives and creating stories, and so like all this cutesy stuff that he's been doing, he's playing in this creative playground right here and going, ooh, I made a connection here. He's just connecting motifs and tail types. And he's like, this tail type is similar to this tail type. But that doesn't mean that it's actual history, that it really happened. It's just this is a story within a story within a story, and now he's the one that's creating these stories, and he can make those parallels. And isn't that cool as a reader and a lover of fiction when you see parallels like that be made? Yeah. But I think the problem that you're having with it, John, as a historian, is like, dude, people are going to read that and not know that he's playing in a playground. They're going to think that he's really saying that Joseph...
Mormons already do this thing with bad scholarship where they do parallels.
Yeah, right.
So in other words, it's already the whole way, and so maybe he's teasing out, maybe he's manipulating people who already are doing that. I don't know. I agree with you. That he's doing. Mormon reads this, that's fine. And as long as nobody, I don't know. Anyway, so ex-Mormon.
Hey, we blew past one part that I didn't know, is the connection between with Melville, Moby Dick, the author of Moby Dick, and Joseph Smith. That he was a fan and kind of took him seriously and really kind of appreciated the Book of Mormon. And I really liked his connection of saying Melville, who was the unsuccessful, pained, struggling artist, really connected with Joseph Smith as also a pained, struggling author.
Unappreciated,
yeah. Versus Mark Twain, who was
wildly successful.
Yeah, successful and critically successful. Just thought that it was complete crap.
But this is one of those things, Matt, where you're like, yeah, that's a cute connection, but when you look at it for more than 5 or 10 seconds, you go,
Yeah, but I thought it was fun. It was entertaining. It was interesting.
Right.
I thought,
but then he goes further and says that freaking what's his name, Ishmael in he says, in
Moby Dick is the reference to
Ishmael in the Book of Mormon.
Right.
And the book
he's also Ishmael in the Book of Mormon. As if that's not even a character.
Yeah.
What did Ishmael even do in the Book of Mormon?
It's an homage. It's just an homage.
Ishmael had daughters. I mean, that's Ishmael.
Well, but they were both named Ishmael.
Yeah,
I think that's
the only connection.
There's a parallel. It's a parallel.
That was when it was funny. It was fun. It was interesting. I was like, wow, that's really interesting. Then you realize, no, wait, my mistake. It's complete crap.
Yeah.
But it was interesting saying that Moby Dick supposedly was a complete homage to Joseph Smith in the Book of Mormon.
Well, he went further to quote a line from one of his other books that actually had the Book of Mormon in it.
Yeah.
To further support that Melville was a fan.
Yeah.
What were you saying?
His earlier book, right?
Yeah.
Well, Mormonism was a huge scandal of the late 19th century. So, I mean, he was right. I mean, he also points out that, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's first Sherlock Holmes mystery it has a huge Mormon backstory to it. It's
polygamous. Isn't there a polygamous tie-in and everything?
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, it's like Mormons are stealing women or something like that, which is. I mean, it was like the big scandal of the late 19th century. So a lot of famous authors, like you point out, Mark Twain and everybody, have their take on it. So.
Yeah, and were you guys surprised? And maybe because this wasn't his point that the Book of Mormon was well written, was he spent almost no words talking about how bad the Book of Mormon is as literature. He mentions, okay, they use, and it came to pass like well over 1,000 times. And he does say one thing like Mark Twain eviscerated it. And then he'll say, yes, maybe from an outsider's point of view, the Book of Mormon is embarrassing. But I guess it wasn't his point that good writing has good prose and syntax. But that he just was enamored with the audacity of the Book of Mormon. And just the
and I guess I was surprised that he, again, since he's actually Jewish and from Jerusalem and also from Ohio, and he's seeing his family's leaving of Jerusalem and going to America as being related to Nephi's leaving of Jerusalem and his family and going to America, but he hardly gets into the text at all, only because I think that for a Jewish person who actually knows anything about Judaism, the Book of Mormon is so totally ignorant of the whole thing. It would be very hard to see anything of yourself in it, except for just in the narrative form and in other words, it's just in the outline. The outline, yeah, you can sort of see some of this stuff, but he doesn't dwell on the text hardly at all because it's not maybe there. I don't know.
Well, there's chiasmus. I had to say it.
Make me.
Did he say bite me?
I didn't say you have to say it. I said I.
Oh, make me.
Oh, dear.
What about the gaps, though, John? Can you explain the gaps?
Yeah, we need to get the Elder David Jenkins.
Anyway, I feel sorry, but I shouldn't. I mean, I feel bad in a way that I'm, because so it's real. What the reality is, whenever anybody who's an outsider comes at the Mormon writing circle and the Mormon history community and everything like that is like such like everybody is there's such an in group.
Yeah.
And then anybody comes at it from the outside and writes a book or something like that, and immediately we organize like this crack assassin squad to go kill them. So, I mean, and literally, I mean, at the conferences, like at a Mormon history conference, like that's the only time you ever have an author meets critics, when it's really mean. And there's been some very serious ones where. Like there's like a famous horrible incident one where like the guy who wrote The Refiner's Fire, I think it's John Brooks, he went to the Mormon History Conference and there was this panel where it's just one after the people go after them so bad, and so I'm aware of that and I don't want to be like that, but on the other hand the book made me mad. So,
because he hasn't paid his dues.
You have a great description. That was my favorite post as we're talking about this book. That you want to relay that, John?
Yeah, I said that. So because I'm listening to it as an audiobook, right? And so I had to keep stopping because he was driving me crazy. And I was at a certain point, I just decided, okay. okay, I need to go back and get the quotes of this thing on the one hand. But on the other hand, I just want to go and to find it. I want a physical copy of this book. And I actually driving around, since I'm in Utah right now, I'm driving around Salt Lake to go to used bookstores to try to find a physical copy of this book so that I can buy a copy of this book, I can throw it on the ground, and I can step on it.
I just love that image. I gotta get this book so I can stomp up and down on it.
Well, you also had another.
I mean, I'm driving around Salt Lake City thinking of that, So I mean, that's not untrue. So,
well, you also had another.
I got one, by the way. So anyway,
oh, did you stomp on it?
I did not. I was already. The moment had passed.
Well, can you relay that other quote that you had on it? I really liked it. It was something like, "Since everything is not true, everything is equally true, and it's untruth."
Yeah.
Do you remember saying that? Can you flesh that out? Or first of all, quote it correctly.
Okay, so part of the thing that was upsetting to me in the musings and all of this kind of thing, I am a believer, like I was saying, I like this ideas that ideas matter and that ideas are real. And so, saying that every book is a translation, that every book is, kind of where anybody who's writing is, taking something that is plates, they're taking something that is their idea of what a book will be and then translating that into a reality, into a physical book. Any of those kind of musings I really like. But when he's going around and doing, like all of these musings, and the analogy that I kept on thinking of is if you're going from, let's say, classically trained art and into the early 20th century, and then you're going into these modernist forms where it's all cubism or something like that. And you, on the one hand, if you're the person that has all of that artistic skill and you can do everything in the classical forms, and then you experiment and you change that all and you show it in all these new kinds of ways, that's one thing. But then when you go on and that's all lost, and you're just now the person who is producing something that actually, when surveyed, people can't tell the difference between what you're doing and what children are finger painting, and you don't have any of those capacities, it's because there's nothing underlying these musings. And so, so all of these musings aren't informed by, it's not just if you have nothing but the text to go by, because he's reading all kinds of things, but every single narrative to him is exactly as valid as any other narrative, whether the narrative relates to reality or not. Because for him, every story is therefore true, or rather every story is also false. And so because everything is false, it's also equally true, and so therefore they're all valid, just as valid as each other, regardless of how close it adheres to reality at all, or in a testable form. So I'm not where he's at philosophically. I think of it as being kind of like this postmodern world where of relativism, sophistry, where everything relative and everything, there's nothing that adheres to reality in any way, and so everything is equally invalid, and in being invalid, it is therefore true. And that's kind of the philosophy I got of him.
Yeah, it seemed like he was trying to create a false equivalency for all art, which that irritated me too. It's like you can't even put the author of the Book of Mormon in the same category as, say, the author of Job. Sure, they both wrote scripture and pseudepigrapha, but they're not equally profound and equally quote unquote true. I mean, they're not. There is a difference there.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So everything's not just all equal in that kind of way, and so there's going to be a way, where when you are writing about something, it's informed by experience. And so when Avi is like doing something where he's read Bill Morane's book and that kind of thing, then that's actually going to have some insight. When he's randomly speculating that Joseph Smith, 10-year-old prophet, is sneaking around Conneaut, Ohio, murdering Solomon Spaulding somehow, it's so divorced from any kind of reality it's insane and offensive. So it's anyway.
Yeah. Like a 9/11.
It's finger painting at that point.
Yeah.
So what part got you so angry, John? What part was it where you're having the strong reaction? Because you said up to this point you were so meh, but then you finally got this had a strong reaction.
Well, I guess I kind of felt like that he, was sort of indicating that philosophy the entire time, but that for the first part of it, I wasn't too intrigued by him sitting around in his junk store in Jerusalem and with the guy who ran the junk store, or when he, I thought that some of the Australians were funny in Guatemala, but in general, like he's bribing guys, like you say, in the hotel to look at Mel Gibson, place Mel Gibson threw up or barfed, so that part of it was, I was kind of meh on that. I mean, the philosophy there, I'm fine. People are having that, but then he kind of got into the Kimura pageant, which I thought was really quite funny. And then he flipped over into just this very serious kind of, in my opinion, speculating in these ways where he is, every one of these musings is equally true to him, so, because it's all equally valid because it's all just stories. And so, I don't know. And so that's when he started making me upset. So
I'm going to guess it was right around the Spalding part.
Well, that's when that's when I wanted to go buy a copy to step on. Yes, but he was already making me mad before then. So,
all right. Anything more you want to say to wrap up?
Well, I like the book. I think it is a book that
I like it less now. You guys have sucked the fun out of it for me.
I'm sorry.
I think it's a book that people who consider themselves nuanced believers would really enjoy, and the whole idea of myth and the narrative, and even though he says Joseph Smith created it, people aren't going to like that, but he attaches meaning to it, and so I think there are some people who still find value in the Book of Mormon would like the book.
See, going into this discussion, I liked Avi, and probably because of the way that P.J. Auckland brought him to life in the narration. Yeah. And now, after hearing John shit on him, I just feel like he's a dick.
He's all right.
I don't think John thinks he's a dick. He just hates what he's saying.
Well, I guess I wish the book had gone one way. Maybe it was doing the one thing, but I felt it was doing just too many things all at once, and it wasn't focused. Therefore, and I think that if he was really trying to, if he was trying to get at what it is to create scripture, or if he was, I would think actually the thing that he should have done instead of worrying about what Joseph Smith was doing at all, is to, because the things that were funny were where he was actually getting at how Mormons do it. That's actually, the whole reason why he was able to get a publisher for this thing is, like he says at the beginning, is because of Book of Mormon the musical, right? And so that they're dealing with modern Mormon culture and all the quirks of all that. And the funnier parts of the book are when he's on the tour and he's, seeing the Mormons for how they are and how genuine they are in that way. I mean, even like Randy was pointing out, the people who kick him out of the pageant are kind of sweet about it,
Yeah, right.
So if he's going and seeing what Mormons are like and how quirky they are and all the goofy things they're doing at the pageant and everything like that, I think that part of it is, that part of it's good and interesting and genuine. That's like an exploration of Mormon culture. It's just like this insane, for me, this kind of crazy hybrid of all of the maybe 5 things that he was doing, none of which he did right. That's the problem for me. So,
all right, I am never going to write a book and ask John Hamer to read it.
Well, I'm sorry I was a bucket of cold water.
No, but I'm not lamenting that at all. It gives me another way of looking at it that I think is valid. So I guess what I'm saying is I validate you, John Hamer.
Oh,
God, that's an inside joke, John.
Oh, speaking of which, didn't we have an announcement?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, this is Randy's last episode.
Stories that my teacher tells to me are about the late midnights in ancient history. Long ago there
Hi, this is Chad from Orem, Utah, and I have met one of the 3 Nephites. You can comment on this episode on the website, infantsonthrones.com, and if you really like what you hear, give the Quorum a 5-star rating and write a short review on iTunes. I did. Anybody for the closing prayer?
His hypothesis is that they've lost faith in anything out there, so they turn to faith in themselves. And
I actually thought that was kind of brilliant. maybe not, but I thought that was that to me does sum up Joseph Smith. Just this grandiosity and saying, "Hey, I've got the answer. I've got." Believe in me, and it becomes more and more grand as he goes along. So there seems to be, and his story is such a story of lack of faith or of not believing in any of these religions. At its core, he's a non-believer, and so he has to start a religion.
He also talks about how the more he learns about Joseph Smith, the less he knows him, and would actually be apprehensive to interview him if he could. Because it would be such a strange interview, because he reinvented himself so many times. But I forgot what my point was. It reminded me when. No, I lost my point.
All right.
Fuck. You please edit that out. Glenn, every time I say edit it out, you leave it in.
I'm intentionally being quiet right now just to let you keep adding to it. I'm mining for gold silently. I don't know.
There was something there when I started. I haven't even had a drop of alcohol tonight, so I have no excuse other than I'm really tired.
That's the problem.
That's the problem.
Your brain is missing its lubrication.
Thank you for listening to Infants on Thrones.